All right, I'll wait a few minutes, see if a few folks drop in. Once I see anybody drop in, then I will get started. For those of you watching after the fact, this is Brian Ullman from the Gem State Chronicle. I just finished up posting an article on the Chronicle in the news section. That means it doesn't go out as a Substack email. News section about the Idaho legislators who were part of Young Americans for Liberty's Hazlitt Coalition have withdrawn because they're frustrated with the way that YAL is engaging in campaigning here in Idaho. And it's been coming to a head, obviously, because I just wrote about it yesterday, about how YAL and also American Federation for Children are just, blasting ads out here without really collaborating with the people here in Idaho who know what's going on. It's been a bit of a frustration, so obviously I wasn't the only one who felt that way. Still waiting for some folks to show up, so bear with me. You see a stack of books here. I needed something to hold up my other camera, that is my phone, for what I'm going to do later. So it's a very jury-rigged setup. Hope you don't mind. Actually, these books that I'm using to hold them up are, as you'll see when it switches cameras, are the Yale Shakespeare Library. It's almost the complete works of Shakespeare that I got at the Eagle Library book sale last weekend. It's missing Hamlet, though, which I found after we got home. But my children are excited. It's fun to have children who are into Shakespeare. But anyway, I see a viewer, so I will go ahead and start talking. So yeah, we're going to talk about the Idaho Freedom Index. It's a publication of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. As most people know, I worked for IFF last year doing communications, which kind of touched everything, including publishing the last Freedom Index. And in fact, I'm going to switch over and take a look at that. So yeah, as you can see, my books there. I would be using my little tripod, but I'm using that for my other camera. So I need to get another one is what it actually is. Anyway, 2023, I actually helped put together the Freedom Index. It was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. It was, kind of stressful at times, but I really had a good time putting it together. Daniel Murphy took this picture. IFF paid him for it. It's a great picture of, looks like the Senate Rotunda or Senate Chamber. In last year's, we put the All-Stars first, and then an explanation of how the scores work, and then the scores. I'll put a district map over here on this side. In previous editions, they had maps showing the, red, yellow, or green, depending on the legislators in those districts. I found that difficult, so we didn't do it last year. They brought it back this year, and I think it worked out well. So last year, it was actually Dustin Hurst's idea to do this, to put a box for each representative, because in previous years they'd had 3 different sets for the Freedom Index, Spending Index, and Education Index. It was Dustin's idea to put them all together, but I worked with the graphic designer to make it happen, and I think it came out really well. It looked great. So this is, again, the 2023 index from last year. And then there's the metrics. How do they determine how to score bills? And remember, Idaho Freedom Foundation does not score legislators. They score bills. That is, they rate the bills, and then how the legislators vote determines their scores. Education Index and Spending Index, and then a QR code to take you to the website to see all the bills that they scored. So I am really happy with what they did this year. I had nothing to do with this year's. I no longer work with IFF. I contracted earlier this year during the session to do the Capital Clarity, but I had nothing to do with the index, and I have to say I'm really excited for how it turned out. The cover is just beautiful. You see the IFF logo here is the falcon, and then you come in here, and what's interesting, you've got over on the other page, you have a letter from the president. That's new president Ron Nate, explaining exactly what the index does and why it's valuable. And this is interesting. The top bills, the best bills, and the worst bills. And this is obviously, again, based on their scoring. So Top bills of the year: Senate Bill 1314, a bill to allow the state to invest idle state treasury money in physical gold and silver, thereby preserving its real value in times of high inflation and debt risk. Obviously, conservatives and libertarians, for that matter, have long held that gold and silver are good investments, especially as the dollar just loses value. Everybody's seen that graph of the decline in value of the dollar since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. So having physical assets seems like a reasonable idea, but the governor vetoed it. And anyway, look at all the other bills that they rated highly. Only one of them was actually signed and passed and signed, and that's House Bill 668, a bill to prohibit the use of taxpayer funds in government facilities for genital mutilation surgeries. Then on the other side, you have the worst bills, like expanding Medicaid to increased postpartum coverage, health and social services ombudsman, that's expansion of government. This is the Senator Cook's cell phone filter bill. That one did not pass. It actually passed the Senate, but got stuck in House. The appropriations bill for Medicaid and Department of Health and Welfare. Office of Early Childhood Services, that was an interesting one and an interesting debate. And that, again, that would have been an expansion of government. That one was stopped dead. The summer EBT program, which, of course, the Senate defeated, and then the budget went back to JFAC, and they stripped it out. And then the Idaho Transportation Department. It's interesting that one got low rated, considering the original one was defeated, and this one also unwound the sale of the ITD building, which I don't think IFF took a stand either way on, but that was part of that last-minute drama on that last day of session. And if I recall, I thought the governor actually just let that one become law without his signature. I don't know. I'd have to check on that. Anyway, so that's the top bills and the worst bills. And isn't it interesting that of the top bills, only one was actually passed and signed into law, but of the worst bills, 1, 2, 3, 4 became law. So that's just an interesting commentary on where our state government is with relation to the principles that IFF upholds. All right, turn the page. It's once again the how does it work. It looks like they've simplified that a little bit. I don't know. Oh, no, it's basically the same as the previous one. Although the metrics, instead of actually putting in the book and taking up page space, they just have a QR code and a web address you can go read. Again, that's a great choice, I think. Every page of this costs time and money to put together. It has to be designed, it has to be printed, it has to be folded. So saving space is good. You don't want something too big that turns people off as well. This is something IFF did in the past. We didn't do last year, but they brought it back this year. It's a rating for the governor based on what bills he signed and what became law. And so Freedom Index 42.5, that's unfortunately kind of average. And then Spending Index very low. And that 3.17, that number matches a lot of other Republican legislators, the ones who voted for essentially every budget bill. And of course, according to IFF's metrics, a lot of these budget bills are wasteful because they spend far too much money. There's a note here at the bottom that they excluded the Education Index because only 10 bills were considered on the floor of either chamber. And that's just not a big enough sample size to really get an idea of how that reflects a lawmaker's voting record. And that's actually something I agreed with. I thought that the Education Index just didn't have enough bills. The reason they split it off is because they rated it according to different metrics than just the Freedom Index. However, again, there just wasn't enough of them to really get any good data. So again, over here, so now it's the same thing as last year, but instead of 3 metrics, you just have the 2, freedom and spending. And what's really interesting to me is when you see differences in districts, like District 1. You have Senator Herndon, obviously he's solid. Representative Dixon, I would say he's okay, D+, maybe that's not too good, but on the important issues. And that's another thing. The Freedom Index and the Spending Index, they're valuable metrics for evaluating your lawmakers and how they actually voted rather than just what they said. Because lawmakers, they say anything and everything, especially when they're campaigning. Oh, yes, I'm a conservative. I support the Second Amendment. I support fiscal transparency and responsibility. I want to cut government. I want to cut taxes. But then you look at how they vote, and that it doesn't always reflect that. So the Freedom Index is a valuable metric, a valuable tool in looking at how they voted. It doesn't capture everything, and that's where you as a voter have to go do your research. In this case, someone like Sage Dixon, he votes right on a lot of the big issues. However, on a lot of the little issues, the little things, I wrote an article about this about a month ago, and I used my own legislators as a case study. Representative Josh Tanner gets really high marks on the index, whereas Representative Ted Hill, he's kind of in the middle, kind of where Sage Dixon is. And yet, Ted Hill votes right on a lot, pretty much all of the big issues. The launch grant last year being a notable exception. So that's where you really have to do your research. So let's flip back, see what else we have. So those districts are interesting, and then you have Representative Sauter over there, and I think he's not necessarily representative of his district. North Idaho is very conservative, but you have him in there. How did that happen? Well, he had, I believe, a 5-way race last year, and now he has a 3-way race this year. And that's what happens a lot. You have legislators who they're far more moderate than their district. And so you have numerous people in that district will come out and say, I can beat him. I know my people. I know my neighbors. I know they don't support these things. Therefore, I can beat them. But then you get 2, 3, or even 4 of those people in the race. They end up splitting the conservative vote. Oftentimes, as in the case of District 1, I spoke with both Spencer Hutchings and Jane Sauter, no relation, and they agree on most every issue. However, there are people who support one or the other do so out of personal differences, temperament differences, personality differences, or just factional tribal differences. And so what will likely end up happening is that they'll split the conservative vote, and Representative Sauter will probably win re-election with 40%. And to me, that's frustrating, but that's the nature of politics. District 2 and District 4, they're pretty solid, aren't they? I mean, District 2 might be the only one with A's across the board. But, I mean, Senator Hart, Representative Hawkins, Representative Scott, they're all fantastic. District 4 is great as well. I mean, and some of these other guys, the C's are not bad. I mean, Jordan Redmond, he does a lot of great stuff. Again, probably votes the wrong way according to IFF on some of the smaller things, but those smaller things add up. Senator Bierke, why does he have an F on the spending index? I actually talked to him. I've published that interview. And his perspective is that as the vice chair, a vice chair on JFAC, he has a responsibility to support the bills that the committee passes, which I've heard both sides of that. My own senator in my district is Senator Scott Grow, who's the chairman of JFAC, and he says the same thing. If the committee passes it, I have a responsibility to support it on the floor. But then there are other people, the people who aren't chairs and vice chairs, so maybe it's easy for them to say, will say, no, if you don't like a budget, you need to vote against it. So, that is that. Just different perspectives on it. But that's why some of these folks have reasonably good spending or Freedom Index scores, but not so good spending index scores. So I'm doing this stream with OBS. I was trying to set up a multi-stream so it could go to Twitter and Rumble as well, but I couldn't get it working, so I just decided to go forward with it. So this is just streaming to YouTube right now. I don't see any comments, so okay. I don't know if they'll show up here. I'm still practicing this. I'm still figuring it out. So looking at some of the other ones here. My camera's not there, so we got to flip over. District 6, another situation that's the same. You've got Representative McCann is very moderate, could even say leftist. Her Freedom Index is down under 40. And meanwhile, in the same district, you have Senator Foreman, who has A's across the board. But once again, there are 2 challengers in District 6, Colton Bennett and Dave Dalby. And I talked to both of them, and again, they're fairly even on the issues. But hopefully they don't end up splitting the vote. District 7, 8. How did District 8 happen? This is the same district that once had Dorothy Moon as their representative, but then they had redistricting, and so most of their representatives come from Elmore County, Mountain Home. All 3 of them are being challenged. Senator Schroeder's being challenged by former Representative and Senator Christy Zito. Blanksman's being challenged by Faye Thompson, and Bundy's being challenged by Rob Beiswinger. So that'll be an interesting one, because I think in this case, I think District 8 is much more conservative. You've got the urban center of Mountain Home, which is a small urban center, but then you have the counties, and all those counties, Boise County, Valley County, they're all very conservative. Abby Lee has, I think, the lowest score of any Republican. She's down under 30%. Of course, she's not running for re-election. She announced halfway through the session that she would be stepping down. I think Brandon Shippey probably would have beaten her, and maybe that came into her consideration. He's now facing former Representative Scott Syme in that race, who lost to Judy Boyle last year by 6 votes after redistricting. Once again, you look at Jason Gallagher, A's across the board. I think this is a very conservative district. After she announced that she would no longer be running, Abby Lee voted with the left, with the Democrats, on a lot of issues. There were numerous issues, especially in committee, and that's another interesting thing about this. The Freedom Index does not capture what happens in committees. Somebody can support a bill in committee and then vote against it on the floor, or vice versa. And also some people support bills or oppose bills in committees for various tactical reasons. So several times I would watch her in her committees join with the Democrats to defeat a bill, most notably with Senator Lenny and Representative Gallagher had a bill to restrict mask mandates. Oh, no, wrong one. Restrict the authority of health districts. The mask mandate bill never got a Senate hearing, but the one to restrict the authority of health districts was defeated in the Senate committee when Senator Lee flipped and joined the Democrats. And I saw that happen several times, so perhaps the mask came off. The fact that she was the assistant majority leader, it's kind of scary how not only do we get people with very leftist worldviews who run and win as Republicans, but then they become, part of Republican leadership. That's pretty scary for such a red state. And Judy Boyle, her score's kind of gone down over the years. She did not draw a challenger this year, and she ended up being endorsed by IACI, and she's apparently supporting the challenger to Representative Gallagher. So we'll see what happens next year. District 10, this is an interesting one. Tammy Knuckles, she's been an all-star for a long time, but she dropped down to Bs. This year really was tough when it comes to the scores, because there are numerous reasons. I think the fentanyl bill really hurt a lot of people. That one was -4, I think, yet a lot of people voted for it because, we have to do something about fentanyl trafficking, but also there were public threats that if anyone voted against that, they would get millions of dollars thrown against them in their campaigns. So a lot of folks, saw some problems with the bill and debated about those problems in committee and on the floor, but in the end, they voted for it. I'm not saying it was because they were necessarily scared, but because they recognized the political situation. So I think that and several other bills really did a number on a lot of the so-called liberty legislators. The people who are normally A's dropped to A- or even B, and the people who are normally B's dropped to C's, and C's dropped to D's. This year overall, I should go find an average and see how the scores dropped overall. District 10, again, is interesting. I mentioned in my article yesterday about the, just briefly mentioned the fight over Speaker Mike Moyle. Obviously, you look at his scores, 58.9% on freedom, 22.1% on spending. That's not very good. And, I'm sure Rachel Haislip, if she wins, will score better than that. The question is that enough to overcome the intangibles that Moyle has done in his role as Speaker? I've heard from a lot of people I trust, including Representative Heather Scott, who's, kind of embroiled in this controversy, that the work he's done as Speaker, the things that are not quantified by this score, are more important than the score itself. And if you're an IFF purist, a diehard, then that can sound like heresy, but I think there's a grain of truth to that. There is a lot that happens, like I was just saying about committees. There's a lot that happens that doesn't show up in the score. If somebody presents a bunch of bills in committees, but they don't go anywhere, that doesn't show up. If somebody makes a spirited debate that flips a committee from one way to the other, if they're able to push it across the line, then that doesn't get reflected here either. And if, again, this year we had the whole thing with maintenance budgets. If you've been following my work and Idaho politics in general, you know that the JFAC, Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, changed the way they do budgets, so that instead of just doing each agency as a big chunk, they instead did just the maintenance at first. They wrapped up last year's budget for these state agencies into 10 different bills, passed them first in the first few weeks of the session, or at least that was the goal. There was some fighting over it this year. And then came back with the additions that each agency really wanted. I think that was a great way to bring more transparency to the process, gave them more time to debate those additions that were requested. For the first time in many years, the Senate rejected some budgets, sent them back to JFAC for further examination. And that's something else that I just want to point out real quick, that normally when a bill is on the floor, when a bill comes to the House floor or the Senate floor, and if it's defeated, if there are more no votes than yes votes, or if there's a tie, then it's dead. The bill is gone. You can reintroduce the same concept under a different bill, but you have to go through the process again. You have to draft it, have a print hearing, debate it before committee. Budget bills are different, and this is where the attacks on, say, Senator Lenny and Senator Nichols, Senator Trakel for voting to defund the police, or whatever the nonsense is, that's where they miss the mark. Well, they miss the mark in many ways, but because voting against a budget on the floor does not mean you are trying to kill the entire budget. It means there's something in there that you don't like, that you really want stripped out, like the summer EBT was a great example. Division of Welfare within the Department of Health and Welfare. They enrolled in this Biden administration project to hand out EBT cards to families so that they could pay for groceries throughout the summer. And it was going to even go beyond just those who qualified for free and reduced lunches. So that's in the budget, and that passes JFAC, despite the efforts of Senator Herndon and Representative Tanner and several others. So it gets to the Senate floor, and they defeat it, mainly because of that summer EBT program. And that was what the debate said. Senators got up and said, I can't support this because it's, this socialist program that's just going to get people to be more dependent on government. Senator Ben Adams made a good point when he got up and explained his vote, saying that it was like Soviet ration cards. And so that budget was defeated, but, and this is where JFAC bills are different, it's not dead. It goes back to JFAC because they have to pass a budget. That's their constitutional mandate. They have to balance the budget. And so then they re-examined that same budget, and this time they stripped out the summer EBT program, sent it back to the floor where it passed. So when you see mailers or flyers saying that Tammy Nichols voted against the police, remember that voting against a budget means it goes back for revision and then comes back again. So just a little lesson there. Let's see. Where are we? District 11 is strange. Senator Trakel, he gets C's. Again, he's not too bad. I like a lot of what he does. Sometimes what he does boggles the mind, but that's Trakel. Representative Allgood is not running for re-election. You're either going to get Sarah Cheney or Lucas Kaler in that seat. If you're conservative, I think the choice is obvious. Representative Yamamoto, again, F's as well, and she's being challenged. District 12, Adams, Cornelius, and Crane. It really is interesting to see people that I followed throughout the session, and I like a lot of what they do, but then their scores come in as 49, 48, 69, 75 for Brent Crane. And again, it's the difference between the whole picture and looking at some key bills. Like I said, I used my own representatives in District 14 as a case study. You have Josh Tanner getting 89% and Ted Hill getting 65%. And yet on the major issues, on the important issues, on the headline issues, they're basically even. So it's on all the little things where you get a Freedom Index score of C or D or whatever. And that's why I say this is a valuable tool, but it's not the end-all be-all. Take it as a data point and continue to do your research. The difference between a 75% and a 65% is maybe not all that much, But the difference between an 80% and a 30%, okay, now you've got a really big gap between, someone's words and someone's actions, really. Obviously, the Democrat districts are going to be all Fs because they have a vastly different worldview. It's Representative Achilles was appointed to replace Representative Colin Nash, who won election to the Boise City Council. And I don't think I've ever seen a score quite that low. I mean, even the Democrats are in the 20% range on the Freedom Index, but he got all the way down to 11. And honestly, that's a pretty amazing achievement. That you have to actually try to get a score that low. Representative Chu obviously was absent and had a series of substitutes, and I believe she ended up passing away on the day after the session. So, rest in peace. District 20 is over here on the other page, but I already flipped it. Senator Winder is down to 35%. He's just been going down each year. And then the rest. I mean, I don't need to go through all of these. You can go see it on the website. It's interesting to see the bright spots. You have F, 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 F. Oh, and Tina Lambert, A's. District 24, F, 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 F. Oh, Senator Zeiderveld, B's. And of course, out in East Idaho, you're not going to see many high scores. Representative Julianne Young, David Cannon have C and D respectively. Barbie Hart has a C. Andrus has a C. But other than that, it's all Fs. And that really... that brings, it gets me thinking, is there just a vastly different worldview between North Idaho and Eastern Idaho? Something I've been trying to hit at in my candidate interviews as I'm talking to people. What really is the difference? Is it just, if you look at the metrics by which the IFF policy team rates these bills, they seem pretty objective. Does it expand government or shrink government? Does it intrude into the private sector, or does it, return things to the private sector that the government once took? And yet North Idaho legislators and voters seem to score very high on that, whereas Eastern Idaho ones do not. So is it just geography? What is it that makes Eastern Idaho so different? Is it the vast agricultural lands that, the federal lands? Something that brings government closer to the people, where they see government as an ally and a helpful thing rather than something to be, rejected. Whereas in North Idaho, maybe, things are different. That's really a project I'm trying to figure out without even casting judgment necessarily. I just want to know, what's the difference? Why do voters in Eastern Idaho see the role of government so differently from voters in North Idaho? And of course, here in the Treasure Valley, we're just kind of a hodgepodge of everything. We've got Deep Blue Boise, and we've got, Canyon County, which is fairly conservative. Eagle is more or less conservative. But then you have Meridian, which seems to be trending more moderate Republican. So we're kind of a microcosm of everything here, which makes sense. We're, center of the state, capital, everything. All right, let's flip back here because we have maps. It's the heat maps. This is something I did not do when I was managing this project last year, but I'm glad to see they brought it back. So the Senate, and honestly, this illustrates what I was just saying, doesn't it? You have North Idaho is almost entirely green, except for the Coeur d'Alene metro area, the metro area and the area around it. Ironically, Coeur d'Alene itself is green, but the area around it is yellow. But then you have Eastern Idaho is all red, except for Senator Zeiderveld here. And then Treasure Valley here is a mix. And then you go over to the House. This is Freedom Index. The House is a bit more of a mix. And remember, the House has 2 representatives from each district. So this represents an average. I mean, you average Sage Dixon and Mark Sauter, and you get red. Meanwhile, you average Heather Scott and Dale Hawkins, and you get green. So, but again, you see the difference. You see North Idaho compared to Eastern Idaho. 30 is Julianne Young and David Cannon, which are some of the few bright spots out there as far as these metrics go. And then spending, once again, North Idaho votes against excessive spending. Eastern Idaho votes for it. They vote to increase spending, increase government. And instead of just complaining about it, I want to know why. What is it that makes them different? again, this is stark. It's almost like we're two different states. Yeah, you have this state up here on the Panhandle, then you have this state over here, and it's kind of a mix, like an estuary here is a mix of saltwater and freshwater. So, and this is cool. Letter from the policy director. Nicholas Kleinworth, he started at IFF before I was there as an intern, and then became a policy analyst. No, before he was a policy analyst, he was a research assistant. So he would do research to support the policy stuff. And then he started doing more of his own. He was promoted to policy analyst while I was there. And then earlier this year, he was promoted again to policy director, which is very cool. He's a very smart guy, very solid, very conservative-minded, but very analytical as well. He's able to really dig into these issues and suss out what's the important thing. If you're not subscribed to the IFF YouTube channel and seeing his weekly show, Fiscal Fridays, you're missing out. I used to produce that. It's good stuff. Tells you where the money is going. So that's very cool to see that he got a special highlight there. And then this is interesting. It's the Rubber Stamp Caucus. So this is spending. These are the people who, and this is new. This wasn't in last year's. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 legislators voted for every single budget bill. And again, Representative Horman, she is a co-chair of JFAC. So I guess you could, that goes back to the argument earlier. Should the chairs and co-chairs support the bills that come out of their committees? What's interesting is you don't see Senator Grow on this. He's also co-chair of JFAC, but he voted against some bills. Like every year he votes against the state lottery bill because he has a personal and I assume religious objection to gambling. So, which tells me that he can vote against bills if he really wants to. And of course, these folks voted for almost every budget. And then we have a bar chart. Charts are fun. This is cool. So this tells you where our Senate is at. Green. We have some yellow. What's weird is there's only 3 yellow. There's only 3. And, yellow is 60 to 80%. Green is 80 to 100. And then red is anything below 60. And that's, of course, the grading scale that I remember from when I was in school. So it seems reasonable, but it's really interesting that there's this many green, only this many yellow. The Senate is very polarized. You're either on the Liberty side or the moderate side. There's very few here, Trakel, Okonowitz, Bjerke, who are in the middle. The House is a little bit more evenly distributed. You have the greens, the yellows, and then the reds. And what's interesting is this lines up fairly well with the Institute for Legislative Analysis. They did both an examination of legislators' votes according to their metrics, and then they did another one according to the Idaho GOP platform, and it breaks down about the same. They measure people according to their votes based on whether they're ideologically Democrat or ideologically Republican, and it breaks down about this. The Republicans here and the Democrats here. So the IFF Freedom Index really is. I still call it the gold standard for bill ratings because they rate 400 bills a year. And so it's not like they're picking and choosing. Some of these other metrics, even American Conservative Union, who does CPAC, they have their ratings and their rewards, but those are often just a handful of bills, maybe a couple dozen. Same thing with IACI, by the way, on the other side. The Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, they rate bills, or they don't really rate them. They just say whether or not they support them or oppose them, and then rate legislators based on how they vote on those. But there's only a dozen or so, maybe 2 dozen that they do that with. So IFF rates 400 bills, and then that creates these scores. And the fact then that these scores then line up so well with the Institute for Legislative Analysis and with the American Conservative Union shows its value, shows that they're on the right track. And then spending in the House, spending in the Senate, once again, it's pretty polarized. And that is it, the 2024 Idaho Freedom Index. I thought the team there did a great job. It looks beautiful. It's a very concise way to Go in there and find out how your legislators voted, how they voted compared to others, how they voted compared to the metrics. And I think it is a very valuable data point. If you want your own copy, you can sign up, go to idahofreedom.org. I'm not being paid to say that. I'm no longer working with them, but I think it's a valuable tool, and I hope you'll take advantage of it. This really puts into perspective what our legislature does. And remember, they come and they make all sorts of promises and claims. I am conservative. I am true conservative. I vote to, for small government and fiscal responsibility. I support the Second Amendment. I oppose the woke ideology. But then this tells you how they actually vote. So it is a valuable tool. It's a valuable data point. It's not the end-all be-all, but it is a tool. And you can use this tool in evaluating your legislators, in sharing with your neighbors and your community how the incumbents actually voted and whether or not they deserve your vote for another term. And that's all it is. So I appreciate the IFF team for putting this together. I'm very happy to have this in my collection. I'll add it along with my my other one. Yeah. Put it in my library for reference. This one I've taken out and referenced numerous times over the last year. If anything, just for the district map. But this is very exciting. I'm glad to have it. I'm glad they did this work. It's a valuable tool. Go to idahofreedom.org, get your copy, and go to gemstatechronicle.com, read the news, read guest editorials, and read my regular columns. I will have more candidate interviews to release later today and tomorrow. I will get all of them that I've recorded out before Election Day, which is 1 week from today, Tuesday, May